Thanks, guys, for that first carrier update. For today's top story from our editorial team, we've got our air cargo editor, Eric Kulish, on with us today. Eric, welcome to FreightWaves Now this morning. How's it going?
Hey, pretty good. Thanks so much for having me on. I've been traveling and hitting the air myself in the last month, so it feels good to get out there and you can see the activity picking up at least domestically.
100%. I was in your neck of the woods out in Dallas this past weekend, and gotta say, man, went through those flight delays at Dallas Love Field. It was just not a great time, but people are picking back up. The airport was full, which means that capacity is coming back online as far as it goes domestically, but it's not quite the case for air freight, right? We're still seeing a lot of capacity crunch across the airlines.
Yeah, absolutely. The domestic carriers have pretty rosy outlooks, at least for the rest of the summer. But international is the big constraint, and it's just such a lumpy recovery. We're optimistic here in the U.S. and a few other countries, but then you see these, COVID virus, mutant strains popping up and outbreaks again, and so where certain countries are starting to open up or impose or create travel bubbles. Some of them are shutting back down. So the carriers don't know how to plan. And so probably more than 80% of the wide body international fleet's still out of service, and that's translates to about 40% decline in cargo capacity that flies on the passenger planes. Overall, freight capacity seems to be getting a little worse tail end of May. um, Anywhere was about 15% down overall when you include the freighters, and now it might be closer to 20%. And we're also seeing a decline. There's some signs that we might have seen a little tapering in volume in May. One company forecaster, Clive Data Services, says volume was down 4% in May, but we don't know if that's just an anomaly or their reporting. We have to get some more June numbers to see if there's some softening. I kind of doubt there's much of a trend there. I think demand's going to be really strong.
And so, other than the pressures from COVID and places shutting back down again, where are those other pressures coming from that are keeping that capacity tight and also driving up the air cargo rates?
Well, it's really interesting. I mean, as you know, just the economy is so hot right now in the U.S. and in other countries recovering, and so there's so many e-commerce orders, and manufacturing is so strong. And as you guys talk about all the time, the ocean freight market is just totally disrupted. There's no capacity left, and some of those shippers are trying to migrate or move to air cargo. So that's a lot of stuff on the demand side. And then you've got kind of less noticeable or kind of hidden pockets of demand that are coming on. For instance, the perishable market is just getting into the high season now out of the U.S. for exports. Although some reports are it wasn't as strong in the first couple of weeks as anticipated, but all those fruit and vegetable shippers are going to be looking for space on aircraft, and there aren't as many freighters this year as a year ago, because a year ago there were all those emergency shipments, freighters with PPE coming in at the beginning of COVID. We don't have that emergency airlift now, so they're having to scramble and send shipments, indirect routes with airlines. Um, and then a couple other, interesting draws on capacity are India, with the COVID outbreak there, and a lot of humanitarian flights sucking up some of the capacity, and also the NATO and U.S. drawdown from Afghanistan. It's not a big market there because a lot of that is going to be handled by the military airlift, but some people are saying that to get some of the tanks and big equipment, they'll charter some of the big freighter nose loading, ramp loading freighters like the Russian AN 124. And then the project cargo shippers, the people who have generators and other giant, machinery, will have to turn to 747 8s. And then those 747 8s won't be there for just general cargo as much. So we'll have to see if that materializes.
So, Eric, I mean, we've seen some of these demand strains, but we've also seen some regulation changes in the midst of COVID-19. With some of those regulation changes within the air cargo market, do you see any kind of carryovers or extensions for some of these regulations to help, alleviate travel issues?
Yeah, well, and so I think what you're alluding to, or one of the things that I've reported on recently, is some of the regulatory changes for vaccine shipments, and that's another capacity or demand, new demand that I forgot to mention. That vaccine shipments, COVID vaccine shipments, were kind of slow or didn't materialize in the same volumes as anticipated when the December, January timeframe, because they've gone out in small batches, and the vaccines are mostly shipped domestically within the US. And so you haven't seen that big export demand, but that's starting to change now. The US is getting vaxxed up in other countries. So the manufacturers are going to start exporting that, and that's going to put more vaccine shipments on aircraft. So interestingly enough, the air cargo industry, the air transport industry, realized that some of the regulations that govern dangerous goods or hazmat on planes would have been hindrances to the shipment. So they went behind the scenes with the UN agencies that set the standards and changed some of the rules so that some of these vaccines aren't classified as genetically modified organisms that are restricted from flying, or for instance, increasing or data loggers that go inside the vaccine packages to monitor the temperatures. Well, they each have lithium batteries, and lithium batteries are covered by dangerous goods, and so they were able to change it, the rules, so if there's one little data logger in a box, it's not considered like a big shipment of lithium batteries, which are hazmat. And then also dry ice. The dry ice is limited on aircraft because when dry ice evaporates or breaks down, it doesn't turn into liquid; it turns into carbon dioxide, and too much of that can asphyxiate a crew or passengers. So they were able to change the limits on those passenger planes that fly without passengers, the cargo only aircraft, because the calculations were initially made with, we've got 400 passengers on this plane and they're breathing and creating carbon dioxide. So we have to limit the amount of dry ice. But without the passengers, you could increase the dry ice limits. So it's just interesting behind the scenes technical revisions that are enabling these vaccines to go out faster.
Eric, really quick, we've got some cool video out of Kansas City with Amazon Air and their Now Express delivery service. Tell us a little bit about what's going on with that, and we can check out that video as well.
Yeah, well, all the express carriers are, continuing to add to their fleets to keep up with huge e-commerce demand, and Amazon's no exception. They just opened daily service with 737-800 aircraft to Kansas City and Pittsburgh. Before that, they opened up in Fairbanks, Alaska. They're operating at about 40 airports now in the U.S. They have their own big U.S. hub opening in September in Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky Airport. So they're just continuing to expand. They've bought 11 767 aircraft of their own, and are putting them out with partner airlines to fly. So it's just a big expansion on their part to keep up. And every month their flight activity keeps growing.
We said it on What the Truck yesterday, me and Dooner, that Amazon isn't just a logistics company. They're on their way to being the logistics company.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, what easier way to just do it yourself in-house, and it only kind of makes sense. And we'll see if any other giant retailers will follow suit with their own kind of infrastructure internally to make things a little bit easier.
Absolute dominance. Eric, thank you so much for joining us this morning on FreightWaves Now. Of course, you can go find all of his stuff on freightwaves.com.